Complex trauma doesn't heal linearly. You won't up one day fixed. Instead, healing announces itself through small, strange little shifts. Some you'll notice, and some that your therapist will notice first. Today, I'm breaking down the actual signs that CPTSD is beginning to resolve, all backed by what we know about trauma neurobiology and what I've observed in 15 years of working with people, first as a body worker and now as a therapist. Something that I notice frequently because it's more obvious is that a client might see me for 1 to 3 years and then suddenly notices something in my office. And it's not something small that they didn't see. Sometimes it's just, "Oh, I didn't realize how much I like that interesting design on the wood of your coffee table." Sometimes, and this has happened more than once, they miss the entire 4-foot branch that is on the wall. That branch has been there the whole time. They just the way CPTSD affects our perception, they were unable to see it. This isn't about being unobservant. Trauma causes chronic threat detection, and so what happens somatically is our visual field actually narrows. This attentional narrowing or perceptual tunneling has been documented since the 1990s. Our brain is scanning for danger, not for decorative branches. When clients start seeing the branch, the art, the books, the room details, their dorsolateral prefrontal cortex is starting to come back online. There is now a surplus of attentional capacity available, whereas before, when we were more symptomatic, it was less available. This is very nervous system determined. Is my environment safe enough to notice things beyond threat cues? This is one of the most reliable indicators that I track clinically, at least at the nervous system level. The environmental awareness expands when the internal threat response contracts. Number two, mental clarity and cognitive organization. People with CPTSD complain about brain fog a lot. Executive dysfunction is a part of having CPTSD. Executive functioning is what helps me plan. It helps me actually inhibit my emotions. Like sometimes I'm feeling a really big emotion and I don't want people to know because it's not appropriate or it's not safe. Being flexible, your working memory, the working memory is what we do to actually learn something, and organizing our lives. These are all executive functioning activities. This has nothing to do with intelligence. The other population I work with a lot are people with the gifted neurodivergent diagnosis. Gifted people have high IQs. It's not as simple as that. I'll do another video on giftedness at some point. But being very intelligent is a part of that. So you can have a very high IQ and very low executive functioning. And so what that might look like is somebody can research a lot and they can give you really detailed, accurate explanations for things. They can theorize really well, but they can't take all of that intelligence and then turn that into a daily functioning life that happens in an organized and easeful fashion. So in this case, with the brain fog, the prefrontal cortex is chronically suppressed by an overactive amygdala. So it's not that this person necessarily has ADHD. We may treat the CPTSD and find out that they have ADHD. Um, but they will behave as though they have ADHD even though they don't have it. So as the nervous system regulates, clients report that their thoughts start to become more linear, or at the very least, they're coming one at a time instead of all at once, not at all, or in a kind of random fragmented kind of way that's overwhelming and hard to track. They also notice that they can complete multi-step tasks without losing the thread. And they can remember conversations more accurately. Whereas when you have the CPTSD, you can have a conversation and 2 minutes later it's gone, right? It's not dementia, it's not a memory issue. It's the amygdala not allowing the cortex to do what it does. And we can now make decisions without paralyzing rumination. So if you don't know what rumination is, that if you haven't had the pleasure of experiencing rumination, rumination is just when either all the time or especially after an emotionally charged event, you can't stop thinking about it. Um, you can't stop thinking about it. You can't stop trying to solve it. Um, and even when you try to stop thinking about it, those thoughts just pop up again in your mind with some anxiety feelings in the body, and they just keep on going. Or in the decision context, maybe you're just trying to figure out what you should buy at the grocery store, and you're thinking about not only what you're going to buy at the grocery store, but who you're going to encounter at the grocery store, how you're going to handle the checkout line, things like that. So the sensation of regaining your ability to think and the loss of the brain fog is like this static clearing. Those of us who remember that TV static and that radio static. It's like that static clears and you can get a clear signal again. Now people are able to think through problems instead of just reacting. When you have CPTSD, everything is overwhelming. So when something, sometimes even minor, happens, it's the worst. You feel crushed. You feel so overwhelmed that something just happened. You can't help feeling that way. It's just this big wash of sensation that comes over you. After CPTSD, or as you heal out of it, a problem will happen. And instead of having this big sensation, you can see that it's something you need to address. And you can triage, is this something I need to do right now? Or is this something I can wait a little bit to do? And how might I prioritize my actions? We have evidence from neuroimaging that trauma treatment increases prefrontal activation and decreases amygdala reactivity. So we know not only from, I'm going to use a big word, two big words, phenomenologically, which is how I know it from my own personal experience, because I certainly see my clients gain more executive functioning and have a decrease of a fear response. But we also know from empirical science that this is now true through the instruments that we use in that type of thinking. And so ultimately, cognitive functioning, so our ability to think clearly, returns because our brain architecture, the structure of our brain, is no longer hijacked or taken over by survival responses like fight, flight, or freeze. Okay, the next thing that I've noticed a lot in my practice as people heal, and I'm going to be clear, this is usually a few years in, um, takes a long time to heal from this condition. So number three is curiosity about others' return. And the reason why I name that it takes a long time to get here is because the idea of being curious about others can actually be really scary to people with CPTSD. Um, I hope that for those of you who don't have CPTSD, that it lands for you how intense the fear of people can get with this diagnosis. So even me suggesting that we could be curious about others can be frightening for someone with CPTSD. Healthy humans are naturally interested in other people, even people who are a little bit more on the introverted side, or people on the autism spectrum. Healthy people with autism. We like all people like to be with people, maybe to different degrees and in different ways. But it's something that is an important part of our overall holistic health. We're wired for social connection. It's one of the reasons why humans are so powerful on the earth, for better or for worse. And trauma really disrupts that circuitry, especially CPTSD, since it is a attachment and relational based type of trauma. So when we're in chronic survival mode, other people are threats to manage, sources of potential rejection, and triggers for hypervigilance. So imagine, I use objects a lot, and so perhaps we'll try to use an object here. I'll just draw on the board. So I'm here by myself, and then this chalk, usually I use like an actual object. I'm going to use a chalk drawing though, just since that's what we're working with here. So let's say somebody else walks into the room. All right. So that's my little someone walks into the room. Okay. Um, what happens for the person with CPTSD is that person who just walked into the room symbolizes a threat. So as soon as someone walks in, someone with CPTSD, they'll get a little tight. I'm exaggerating. Um, this person who just walked in is suddenly a source of potential rejection. It's an inspiration for hypervigilance. So just because that person is there, now involuntarily I become more intensely scanning for threat in the environment. And so how does the CPTSD person with CPTSD look when another person walks into the room? Not that different. A lot of this tension and a lot of this threat might be happening on very subtle levels, but the body is tensing, the heart rate is increasing, and changes in the brain are occurring. So when we're in this state of threat, there's no bandwidth for genuine curiosity. We just can't do it, which is why me even suggesting that someone with CPTSD might get curious about others is potentially a scary thing for me to say. And I just want to acknowledge that again. So it is a sign that you're healing from CPTSD when you meet someone, or you're maybe even with someone that you know, and your brain starts populating with questions that you actually want to ask the person. You actually want to know what the answers to those questions are. You're not asking questions just to seem normal or mask your symptoms. We can notice the details of what the person is saying. We can remember them. We can feel interested. We can think about the person after the experience. We don't experience the interaction as being anxious or numb. We feel a sense of openness, maybe some uprightness, perhaps some joy and warmth eventually when we're in that interaction. So for those of you who know neuroscience, and you can look those things up because I'm not going to get into this right now, but I'll just name that what we're talking about is the social engagement system, and social engagement requires ventral vagal activation from the polyvagal theory. It is a theory, but it's very helpful. So I would say that even if it gets disproven, I'm still going to probably think about people along the lines of what that theory suggests, even if the actual brain mechanism isn't true. I've seen a lot of people helped by that. When that ventral vagal activation occurs, we're in the rest and digest part of the autonomic nervous system as well. So this is where, and this will bring us into the next section. This is where our digestion starts working better, which means our hormones start working better, which means our immune system starts working better, and overall our health increases. So when the ventral vagal comes back online, we're more curious, we're more connected, we're more genuinely interested, uh, because we are just physiologically free to do that. The body is now free to do that, whereas before it wasn't. So moving on to the next section, medical symptoms resolve sometimes, not always. So I see a lot of folks in my practice who have CPTSD, but then they also have what we call medically unexplained symptoms. Just because somebody has a symptom that the medical field has not diagnosed doesn't mean that they are not suffering with a physical problem. Um, Sometimes it's true that people can feel like they have an illness when they don't. And we have to be really careful about dismissing people's reports of symptoms. So sometimes the CPTSD is causing the symptom itself, and resolving the CPTSD decreases the symptom. And then sometimes the CPTSD is exaggerating a different medical condition, and the medical condition symptoms can decrease as well. So symptoms like chronic pain, digestive issues, migraines, and autoimmune symptoms can quiet. So again, let's notice if you have an autoimmune disorder, that is not the same thing as your CPTSD. And if you resolve the CPTSD, which absolutely impacts the immune system, you're going to experience a decrease in those autoimmune symptoms. So the research is clear. Chronic stress and trauma dysregulates the HPA axis. And I'm not going to get into that either, but this is the part of the autonomic nervous system that can wildly impact hormones and the immune system and the inflammatory system. Let's see, and pain perception actually. All right, we will say often colloquially that trauma lives in the tissues. That's a shortcut, but what that means is that when we are chronically traumatized, we're chronically bracing. Even if you are somebody who's experienced a collapse pattern, like you can't get off the couch, you can't stop binging YouTube, um, you're still bracing. One of the reasons why the collapse pattern happens is because there is so much tension in the body that the person is exhausted. So somatic therapy studies have shown that nervous system shifts out of chronic activation. When the nervous system shifts out of chronic activation, inflammatory markers decrease, pain thresholds normalize, right? So we don't get to where we don't feel pain. We feel the appropriate amount of pain so that we know not to keep hurting ourselves, but we're also not completely blasted by pain. And stress-related physical symptoms resolved, sometimes dramatically. And we're kind of beating that drum a little bit here. But I have to say, as a therapist who has seen these things resolve so many times, it's pretty amazing. And that may be because I grew up at a time where the medical philosophy is you have a symptom, you take a medication, it's the medication that fixes it. To see things get resolved by means of physical and psychological interventions, and to have that affect the medical, that which is supposed to be in the medical category of things, feels miraculous because it goes pretty strongly against what I was taught. So an example of this is somebody with decades of unexplained stomach problems disappear after a few years of trauma processing. And I know it sounds like a lot. I have a lot of time. I have looked far and wide for anything that can speed this up. You can't speed this up. Um, I think sometimes people do have some unusually fast healing processes, and I think that's really wonderful. But for the majority of people, that's not the case. And to insist that people need to heal quickly can be pretty disheartening for people who are going through the actual normal long process. The long process isn't wrong. It's the quick processes that are actually the outliers. Okay, so this person who has the stomach problems, a few years of trauma processing, it wasn't that their pain was fake. It wasn't that their digestion issues were made up. They were actually being caused by physiological means, but those physiological processes were kicked off by the fear in the amygdala that started a whole cascade through the body. So, trauma is not just psychological, it is physical, it's systemic. And when we heal the symptoms of CPTSD, we can often take a few medical issues with us, which is very nice. Not without supportive interventions from appropriate medical providers, I will add. I work with a lot of medical providers. Okay, next section. Um, so sometimes when people start to heal, their symptoms don't disappear, but they change. Maybe some other things are getting better, but there's a few things where it was this and it's now that. And this can be confusing. For example, someone might have been dissociating for years, but then they start having panic attacks. Sounds worse, but in the developmental process of healing CPTSD, panic is actually more sophisticated than dissociation. So some aliveness is actually starting to come back in the person. And I have sat with many clients who are frustrated with that part of the healing because the dissociation, while it was uncomfortable, it wasn't nearly as uncomfortable as the panic attacks, even though the panic attacks are an improvement. So that's tough if you haven't lived that, you can imagine. So when we're in panic, the nervous system is recognizing that there's something that we need to fight or flee. So we're actually in the do something about it energy. When we're dissociating, the system has given up entirely. It's not even trying to survive at that point. It's trying to soothe and get through it, which is a different type of survival. So it's still a survival strategy, but there's a little bit more of a resignation that this isn't going to get better. Another example is nightmares stop and waves of grief emerge. So it wasn't that the person didn't have grief with them. It was always there, but it was held at bay by the nightmare pattern. So all of this to say is trauma resolution is not simply symptom elimination. It can look like symptoms going from a worse symptom to a better symptom in terms of how we think of this through the order of the nervous system processes. In the event of an attack, the system will want to fight or run before it's going to want to collapse. If the system decides to collapse, that's because it's assessed that the threat is too big to fight or run. That's not good. Um, so really what we're looking for with trauma resolution is not never feeling uncomfortable feelings again, never feeling activated again, never feeling triggered again. It's really more about restoring nervous system flexibility, being flexible. Like, can I get activated? Like someone cuts me off in traffic. That used to activate me for so long. Now someone cuts me off in traffic and I feel my heart racing, I feel anger, and then 30 seconds to 90 seconds later, I'm back to more of a baseline. I might feel a little bit of shake still, but I'm on my way out of it. So that's nervous system flexibility. Nervous system rigidity is more like I am stuck in a state of terror all the time. Again, if you've never experienced that, and it's hard to believe that people are living that way, people are living that way. Stuck in terror all the time, that's rigidity. If I'm stuck in like a flat dissociation, monotone all the time, that's rigidity. So what we're seeing is like there's just no variation. Okay. Panic in and of itself isn't bad. Dissociation in and of itself isn't bad, but those are states that we are meant to visit and then leave. So we're moving through layers: freeze, fight, flight, and then genuine regulation. That's the hierarchy. So in therapeutic terms, we arrive there through titration. We're slowly introducing both positive experiences in therapy and revisiting some of the trauma experiences. It doesn't have to be the actual memory, it can just be the way it's feeling in the body. And slowly over time, as we do both of those things, we don't jump from traumatized to healed, but we gradually make our way there. So we're moving through the stages, and each stage has its own appearance. And that, as a therapist, that's what I'm looking for. When the person walks into my office, what stage are we in? Are we very, very early? Are we halfway through? Each of those stages has um, a different way of looking and working with. So a few additional research-backed signs that CPTSD is healing. Sleep architecture normalizes. So people are sleeping through the night, or sleep actually becomes restorative, because some folks will sleep through the night, but they don't feel rested when they wake up. That's because REM sleep is often suppressed in CPTSD, and that returns as well. So we've touched on this a little bit, but your emotional range will expand. It's not just numb to overwhelmed. You get access to nuanced emotions, contentment, a little frustrated, wistful sadness, joy about this thing. It's not just all good or all bad, which is what CPTSD can, well, a lot of CPTSDers don't ever feel good, but things are more nuanced. And it's not that you heal from CPTSD and then everything feels good forever and ever, amen. It's not like that. You start thinking about the future. I've seen many clients go through, I'm not huge on New Year's resolutions, but it's a cultural thing. So like I've seen many clients go through many New Year's and they don't even acknowledge it. And you start to see them wanting to, like, around this time of year, it's early January, by the way. Um, Around this time of year, actually wanting to plan the year, or actually think about their values, or actually think about, something they want to accomplish. So that's cool. So the reason why future orientation is hard is because trauma locks you into this, like, eternal present moment scanning for threats. So that's interesting, right? I teach at a Buddhist college, so uh we're all about presence and being in the moment, but you can be too in the moment. So you can kind of think about CPTSD as being too in the moment in some ways. So when you start to heal, you can actually make plans and imagine possibilities and think past the next week. Boundaries become clear. So people with CPTSD can often feel boundaryless. They don't know where they end and others begin. They might feel like people know what they feel and think, not like in a schizophrenia kind of way, but like in a little bit subtler version of that. And so they'll feel this kind of like persistent shame that everybody knows how, I put this heavily in quotes, screwed up they are. Or they can um, feel aggression when they have to say no to someone. They can get mad that they're being put in a position where they have to say no. They really just want other people to already know what they need without them having to say it. As we heal from CPTSD, we can also identify more what we want in relationships instead of just constantly reacting to other people's wants and needs. We can actually say, oh, I'm noticing that I want this in this relationship. And lastly, interoception improves. So interoception is feeling within. I can feel hunger, thirst, fatigue, whereas before I might have just felt a constant blanket of terror or dissociation, nothing. They can respond appropriately instead of ignoring bodily signals until a crisis emerges. If we want to stay in a good mood, some of the easiest ways for us to do that, amygdala activation aside, are to stay regulated through food and movement and relationship. So if I can't feel the signals that I'm hungry or sleepy or I need a friend, I I can't keep myself in they call it homeostasis, but I can't keep my body running in a comfortable way. And so that can add to the amygdala activation and make the crisis happen. So none of these shifts are small. They're all a really big deal. They can kind of feel small to the person because they're the one that's living it. When I see these things, I get really excited and I'll tell my clients that I'm geeking out because I saw this thing and they think that's funny because I'm hilarious. Or however I have to deliver that information because not everybody responds well to humor, but you get the idea. Um, and they represent real fundamental neurobiological changes. These are actually signs that things are happening in the brain and the nerves and the immune system and the endocrine system. Um, and that's really important. It's extremely important for the people who are experiencing it and their loved ones. So, in summation, in conclusion here, trauma healing does not mean returning to who you were before. Especially for CPTSD, there often was no before. That's one of the biggest ways we distinguish CPTSD from PTSD. With PTSD, there was a before, and then before the trauma, there's the trauma, and now I'm me with symptoms. With CPTSD, it usually starts really, really early. So we haven't really formed our personalities yet. So the trauma is like a part of the personality. So as we heal from it, we're actually developing something that we never had. So like that's actually kind of cool. I think sometimes my CPT, like folks with CPTSD, get kind of a very hard one um, view on life, but a cool one, and that is they actually have this chance to become um, very different than a lot of people get to. Most people kind of crystallize their personality in their early 20s, but people who heal from CPTSD, especially a little bit later in life, they get to find like a whole new person in there. Uh, you have to develop a nervous system that can respond with flexibility to life instead of just rigid survival. So if you notice any of these signs, even small ones, that's really important data and it should be taken seriously. And I always really encourage my clients to celebrate when they notice that. Go get yourself a piece of chocolate. Go to your special place in nature that you like celebrate it. Go have dinner with a friend. Um, Mark it. Buy yourself a little, go get a little rock and paint it, you know? It means your system is reorganizing. Trust the process, even when it doesn't look like what you're expecting. Like when you go from dissociation to panic, not fun, but positive. Um, so this is maybe my third YouTube video. So I'm going to do the awkward YouTube thing and I'm going to say subscribe for more on the actual mechanisms of trauma recovery. I'm also talking a lot about counselor effectiveness on this channel. Um, I'm going to bring in neuroscience. I'm going to bring in somatics. I'm going to bring in phenomenology. I have a philosophy background, so I'm going to talk about philosophy. At some point, I'll talk about phenomenology versus empiricism. So I invite people who are nerdy and they're wanting an authentic experience. I deliberately did not. This is like not a work day, so this is, I'm not going to always be looking tip top, and that's what I want this channel to be about. So thanks for being here and looking forward to the future.